The next thing we're going to install is the control underhood harness. I want to point out a few things with this harness before we install. The orange and green wire you want to hook to the negative of the battery. Red you want to hook to the power on the battery. It's very important to make sure you hook these two to the negative on the battery. This brown wire you want to hook to the small tab onto the solenoid. Through the hole we already drilled in the firewall, you'll want to push this end plug through that hole into the cap. And this red and white wire you'll want to hook to the ignition fuse. This wire, when you hook it up to ignition fuse, you want to make sure the fuse shuts off when you shut the truck off. On the older truck models you'll find this kind of fuse, ignition fuse, and then you'll want to install this little tab. And you'll want to make sure this little tab is installed on the power side of the fuse panel. And then you'll take your ignition wire from the harness, control harness, and you'll plug it in to the tab. For the newer trucks, they use a smaller fuse. And I'm going to show you what to do. What you want to do is take the red and white wire right in behind the glass fuse. We'll cut the wire. And then you'll strip this wire and you'll butt connect, and then you just plug that right into the fuse panel. Once you find your ignition fuse between 10 and 15 amps, you'll want to pull the fuse out and put it in the bottom of the terminal here. And then on the top terminal you want maximum 10 amps for the control harness. And once you put the ignition fuse in, and then you can just plug this right back in where you pulled that fuse from. This end you'll plug into the MPX module. These two plugs go into the very front of the truck. Then you'll want to apply a little bit of grease and then plug these together when your lift plow is not on, and you could do it on the lift side of the plow, and that prevents corrosion. Now we have installed the control harness. We put the power wire onto the positive side of the battery, and we put the two grounds on the negative side of the battery, and we put the brown wire up to the solenoid. We are now going to install the white plug. We're going to push it through the hole we drilled through the firewall. Before we install the control harness, you'll want to find an ignition fuse. Right now we got negative, so we're going to turn the ignition on. And we have power. And now we're going to turn the ignition off to make sure that is the proper fuse, which we do. The ignition fuse must be a 10 or a 15 amp fuse. Now we're going to remove our fuse since we found which one we want to use for ignition. And then you're going to want to take that fuse you pulled out and put it into the bottom terminal here. And then we're going to put it in like so. If necessary, you could extend the ignition wire. And we also ran the wire through the front out to the front of the truck, to the bumper. When the plow is not installed, you take the plugs, put a little bit of grease, plug them in, and plug them together so it'll keep from corroding.